everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today and coming all the way down to the Angelica. My name is Mara Webster. I'm the co-founder and host for In Creative Company, and please join me in welcoming actor and producer Rose Byrne. Thanks.
Hi there. Thank you guys for coming out. You're so sweet. On a grey Friday. My God, what day is it?
No one ever knows anymore since 2020. Well, and it's such a great episode to show for this series as well. In starting off and talking about the show, season 1 was so great because it was Sylvia and Will really figuring out how do we become friends again after we've had this falling out. And season 2 is like, okay, well, what happens in the aftermath of the longevity of two dysfunctional friends getting close together again?
Yeah.
And how did that kind of set up a slightly different space to play in?
It's actually very hard for the writers, to be honest, to come, because it's all conflict, right? You have to have conflict to keep the story going. And it's like, okay, how do we set that up? And so obviously it was sort of setting him up in this relationship that was actually very dysfunctional, and her trying to hold back her opinion on that. That's sort of the first half of the season. And then really, to me, the second half is about my husband having his nervous breakdown and his kind of crisis, and the roles being reversed there. I think that's a big part of the tension in the second half, and Will getting involved with that. But it's harder than it looks. It's very hard to write comedy in general. It's very hard to keep the stakes high enough to make it funny.
Because also when the show was created, I heard that the original idea was to have new characters each season. And then at one point they spoke to you about, the two of you staying on because it was working so well. What did it look like when everybody then discussed, okay, well, what's the story going to be? Because we haven't planned for this.
Well, when they said, look, this is looking really funny and we really think it's going to, they already had started doing soft pitches for ideas, but comedy's it's a process. It's very like, even when you get to set, there's a script, you have the scene, but often it's rewritten that on set, and then Seth will come in and rewrite it again, and then I will pitch it. So it's a very different way of working, and when people come in and out, sometimes it's hard for actors who are coming in and out to see how the evolution of the scene and how it, and it's not always like that for every scene, but it often is, and it's a very specific way of working. It always takes me a few days to be like, how do I do this again? Oh my God, because it's comedy, it's harder.
Well, because it's comedy. It's not a drama and a comedy at the same time.
Actually, very specific.
What feels very different about something that is just the lens of comedy, because even scenes where they're a little bit more emotional, it still leans far more heavily into the comedy of it.
Absolutely. No, the most precious part of the scene is the joke. And that's what you're trying to preserve, and that's what you're trying to honor, no matter if it is more of a sentimental scene or something more intimate. It's still... that is the thing you're trying to delicately hold and honor. And it's so hard. It's very hard. I've worked with so many extraordinary comedic actors, and they make it look effortless, and it is not. So I have such reverence for the Melissa McCarthy's and the Maya Rudolphs and the Kristens. Yeah.
And this season also leans so much more into the dysfunction of this friendship, because again, and a lot of it feels like it stems from their history even more. They're kind of trying to recapture this version of themselves that they used to be. And so in playing Sylvia, what's the fun of someone that's kind of battling between the version of themselves in the present with the dysfunction and the past self and things that they've been annoyed about for 20 years?
It's acting out a whole side of my life that I don't do, but she's outrageous and she's irresponsible, and you still have to kind of root for her, but she gets completely caught up in her friendship with him and reverts to her sort of teenage self with him, or her herself as a college student, and it's obviously very humorous, but it's wildly irresponsible and it's just how far she pushes it for in terms of her marriage and how much he can kind of tolerate, and her family. Yeah.
And one of the things that seems to come up every season is some sort of scene where they want you to play very drugged up version of Sylvia.
Recurring theme.
Because season 1, you had the amazing ketamine sequence. And then this season, there's a whole sequence of her taking edibles and thinking that she's not high at all. And so what's the balance of that? Because it's someone who thinks that they're completely fine and completely normal, but actually is not okay.
I think that's the key. when you are with somebody who is extremely drunk or something, hi, they are just trying to act completely sober and very straight, and that is I feel like the key to those sorts of sequences. And then the physical comedy, they write to our strengths. Nick and Francesca the showrunners and writers and creators of Platonic, at this point we've worked, Seth and I, so frequently together, and it's such a gift to have them write to our strengths. And when you get a season 2, you get to do that more and more and figure out what didn't work in season 1 and really lean into what works into season 2.
I mean, with the physical comedy, there's an amazing scene in episode 10 when you see it, where there's an entire vat of brewed beer that explodes on you, knocking you over and sending you flying. And I heard that you kind of didn't necessarily know how it was going to be accomplished when you read it in the script. So what was the experience of then getting to set and everybody figuring out how to play that out in real time?
It was fun. It's funny, these set pieces, as you call them in like comedic scripts and shows, are always, it's very hard for me anyway to visualize it on the page until I get there, and then I see the kind of thing unfold and what it's going to be, and so I can't anticipate it until I get there in a way, and I go, okay, fine, I will understand. And also what Seth and I bring to it will inevitably change it too, like how we get to the set piece and how broad it's going to be with the physical comedy, but you have to be committed 1,000%, otherwise it will not be funny. So
I feel like actually in reference to that scene, I heard you say anything for a joke, and do you feel like a show like this really pushes the limits of what that means for you?
It does. No, it does, and it should. Like, what's the point? Otherwise, you've got to like always raise the bar with it and figure out new ways to get there. And the writers are always so inventive, and the show is very relatable. It is a show that a lot of people can relate to, whether it's raising small kids or getting back in the workforce or being stuck, having a friend who's stuck in a different time to you, who isn't growing up and evolving. So I feel like the show is really charming like that. You can relate to it in a lot of different ways.
It is, and there's also physicality in a different sense, which is, what is Sylvia not good at? Because you get to go to the LA River and see her kayaking, and even just like how slowly you drag the boat to the water is amazing. And so what's it like also kind of getting to do that type of physical comedy that isn't as big and broad but tells you just as much about her?
I mean, I live for those little moments because it reveals so much, and you see it in the day-to-day with people's behavior when there's something they're not good at and attempting to do it. And the physical thing is so much funny because you get out of your head too. So you're not self-conscious and making decisions and being, actorly, and there's something very freeing about being completely in your body and given a task to do and they're so good at giving me these ridiculous tasks.
And it was so fun to see the costume that you had for that too, because again, she's not outdoorsy, so she overcompensates with the biggest hat. She has a fanny pack and everything, and it's all brand new. How did those details come together for that?
We have an incredible costume designer, Cameron Lennox, who also did Physical, another show I did on Apple TV, and she's just gone on to do The Studio and a lot of Nick Stoller's films, and she just leans into the comedy. I mean, Seth's wardrobe is so funny in the show. His character is so specific with his clothes. They're so ridiculous and also wildly expensive. So it's like this combination of very sort of high concept fashion that can look like a clown but is actually very wildly chic, and she just leans into that, and that was a great opportunity with that because they're dressed so casually, and Sylvia comes in looking like a professional REI rep, as he calls her.
Because there's also such a great arc with her costumes this season, because as you mentioned, she's getting back into the workforce, so she's trying to dress for the part that she wants to be, but not being completely certain and confident in herself. And so how did that shape some of the looks that came together for that journey?
That was a lot of suiting, I remember, and every time I'd put the suit on, Seth would just start laughing at me. He'd just be like, something innately funny about you wearing a suit. You look ridiculous. But that's kind of the idea, exactly. It's like it's a performative side of going back to the workforce and not being confident about it and feeling uneasy and looking strange, which can happen when you're attempting a different kind of role in your life. So they play with those nuances really well because they're nuances, that you can kind of you can pick up on when you start regularly watching the show. Yeah.
Because it's things like, she gets the opportunity to do her husband's company Christmas party, which she's so excited for, but then all of a sudden they amp it up from 200 people to 1,500 people. Yes. And what's the fun in playing a character that constantly backpedals and talks themselves out of things in that way?
It's a frustrating person in someone's life. Like we have those people who overcommit, and then they back out, and it's so frustrating. And it's that. How to inhabit that is funny. It's funny and it's hard because it's tragic too. There's like a tragedy to that person as well. But she, in this season, her husband really calls her out on it. And, Charlie, played by Luke McFarlane, says it's just typical of her, and it's cutting to fully acknowledge that about your behaviour.
How did you feel like when he says that to her face, that, once she kind of recoils and recovers, that changes things a little bit because she's been forced to confront it?
I think it's a huge pivot in the season. It's a really big arc and moment. And again, very relatable. It's those interpersonal relationships we have with our loved ones and friends and wives and boyfriends and husbands, and those moments that really sting, but that, if someone said it to you once and someone else has said it to you, it's like might be true. So.
Because, like you said, there's a tragedy to that behavior because it comes from a place of fear and insecurity and imposter syndrome and will I be good enough? And so kind of going back to what you were talking about earlier, how do you find the way to explore those emotions in a really real way? But again, it's comedy in the scenes.
It's comedy. Well, it's also when she won't acknowledge like that her husband's having a nervous breakdown in another episode we filmed, and she starts referring to Michael Jackson and how that's a nervous breakdown. Like they're like, what are you talking about? And there's a when you won't acknowledge something, there's a delusional quality to you, and that can be funny too. And it's also like when you are hiding behind your own pride because you don't want to admit something and I think Sylvia has a side that's very prideful, and that's a funny dynamic to kind of lean into, and also that delusional quality that is when it's clearly what is happening and someone will not acknowledge it, is that tension is funny.
Because, when she feels like she's under attack or being questioned or being a little delusional, I feel like you kind of play with the tone of her voice really well. Sometimes she gets very high pitched and sometimes she's going to shout in your face to distract you. And how do you find the way that you feel like she's going to respond when she's kind of putting her guard up?
It's intuitive. It's all about the other actor and how the scene is unfolding and how it's evolved on that day. But it's something we do in life to save face. Like we all try to save face. We don't want to be humiliated, or we don't. And she's got this stubbornness about her that is very funny. And I think her stubbornness with Will is very different from her stubbornness with Charlie, her husband, and that's always a fun contrast to play out. Yeah.
And it's fun too because obviously she has Charlie to complain to Will about and Will to complain to Charlie about, but then they kind of form their own coalition. Yes. And how did that make her just feel completely unarmed?
Unstable, yeah. That was not. She wasn't happy with that. That's the other thing. She's very controlling about these relationships, and opinionated about them too. And that's tough. That's tough you can't kind of have it both ways. But she really pushes the limits with that.
Was that similar in what you found when Will starts hanging out with Katie as well? Because again, she's kind of intentionally kept them quite separate to each other, and now they're forming their own buddy.
Yes, and that was very funny. Carla and Seth have known each other since they were 20 years old, so they have a long, funny, crazy history and working together, and that dynamic was very, very funny. And again, deeply uncomfortable for Sylvia to have to acknowledge she wasn't happy with that.
And, in her going back to the workplace as well, you also get great scenes with Adie Bryant and her character, Carrie. And I love the way that she talks to Sylvia. And she kind of she's trying to sound very cool and young and hip and use all these phrases. Yeah. And whenever Sylvia tries to mirror it back, she never really succeeds and kind of just annoys her.
Yeah, I know. She fails. She's like, don't call me that. No, I'm not that. She's like, immediately puts her in her place. Like, no, that's my role. It's not your role. It's like that kind of falling on your face, trying to be cool and hip it's always a funny thing to see.
And there's also the added aspect of, being a parent, and we see her daughters learning to drive, and she's starting to kind of reconcile with the idea of, okay, well, what is my life going to be once the kids leave home in a few years? And do you think she's ready to confront that, or she's still just trying to avoid everything?
I think it's heartbreaking. Like when your child stops saying kissing you in the playground and saying goodbye. Like, I'm there with one of my kids too, and it is like a grief that you go through of like, oh my God, that chapter might be over. Is it over? You know, and then Nick and Francesca have 3 daughters, so a lot of that is really familiar to them and something we talk about. And one of them nearly, applying to colleges now, and so it's a fun thing to mine from all of our lives and those chapters that you have raising kids and what you go through and the kind of the grief around that when they do grow up and they're changing and how you're an empty nester at a certain point.
I like how in the writing as well, though, they can take something that everybody knows the experience of, like a family getting a dog and the husband didn't even ask the wife, and then they just amp it up to 11. Suddenly the family's having dinner and there's the kind of like the fence where it goes all the way around the entire family. And how do you find that they take all these relatable instances and just find the way to really push it as far as they can?
It's a talent. It's a specific comedic talent that, to your point, you take a very familiar scenario in a domestic setting and then you just amp it up, and how to get the stakes higher and higher and more, not ridiculous, but it's that fine tightrope of like how far can you push it to make it entertaining and funny. And it is when they just deliver these scripts each week, I'm just dying with how every story I've heard or experienced or through my own friends and family of what raising kids and being in a marriage is like. Yeah.
Is that also similar to how you and Seth work in terms of just finding the levels of comedy and just going, okay, we've already got it at this level, what could we do to potentially...
Oh yeah, big time. No, we've figured out our setting up, knocking it down kind of back and forth, and we have very similar ways of working in many ways. We're very professional, we're prepared, we come in and we'll take it to the limit and then bring it back down. We can figure out who's got the strength of the scene or who needs to hit what beat, and it's intuitive. It's like a game of tennis or something where you just and I've been so lucky to have that creative conversation with him now for 10 years or whatever, because it's a shorthand after a while, and that's really, really funny. But he continues to make me laugh in the scenes, and I think that's always a great barometer of like, well, maybe it is funny. I don't know. I'm laughing.
Do you get much of an opportunity to rehearse scenes together beforehand to kind of find that?
We always do. No, we rehearse and then we change it, and it'll be like, this isn't working. And he's obviously and it's comedy's hard. It's very subjective. What I think's funny, you might not think's funny. We can all kind of collectively agree what is sad, but what is funny is a much harder thing to capture.
Yeah. There's also so much between the two of them where it kind of feels like they can never both be winning or succeeding at the same time, because that's just not their dynamic as friends.
Yes, yeah.
And how do you feel like the dynamic shifts between them when Will's succeeding versus Sylvia, or the other way around?
It's true. It's something they play with a lot, and there's almost a competitive quality between them, like brother and sister. I've sort of relate a little bit in their relationship more than friends even, because they're so close, and there's that slight underlying opinionated competitive quality you have with your siblings that is innate and like from birth. It's like a deep, cellular sort of experience you have with your siblings, and it feels like it's verging on that with Will and Sylvia. So there's always that tension of who's ahead.
And, the first few episodes of this season, Will was engaged and potentially getting married. And that kind of brought up a lot of insecurity for Sylvia, because she didn't think it was the right move for him, but she was scared to say anything because they fell out for years beforehand. And how did that kind of give you a different place of insecurity to explore within her? Because she was quite open about it to people around her, aside from him.
The tension is always her performing that she's happy and deep down knowing that it's bad, like that he's making the wrong decision, that this is a dysfunctional relationship. They don't have a physical relationship, him and Jana, and so it's her it's when someone's trying to hold back their opinion, and with Sylvia it's that tension of like trying not to say something and then completely putting her foot in her mouth and revealing to her at the wedding sequence that he's having second thoughts. And it's that really funny tension that they play with that is for Sylvia's dynamic very like a signature kind of beat of hers.
And especially because she'd already been going back and forth about how much do I say, what do I say? Yes, yeah. And she had said things to him eventually at that point. Yeah. And so obviously she feels terrible about the timing of how it came out to his fiancée. Yeah. But do you think she's kind of secretly glad that it happened?
I think she's horrified in that moment. I really do think I played it anyway as a completely honest mistake and with no gleeful quality, because it's kind of it plays much better when it's just honest. I think comedy's like a drama, but on top of that, you got to get a laugh. So it felt like everything has to be played very real. And Nick is always redefining and reaffirming that with us in scenes. Sometimes when we get too silly, it's always like we do reshoots often because it's like, this wasn't tonally working. You need to get the stakes higher, or you got to play it actively trying not to be funny, because it won't read. It just won't land.
Yeah, and you were bringing up her marriage with Charlie earlier, and they have this kind of really lovely relationship, but he's definitely always the one that shows up for her in a lot of ways. Yes. And like you said, she struggles to acknowledge that he's not doing well. Yeah. Once she's able to acknowledge that, how did that just upend the character in a lot of interesting ways for you?
I think it was a huge turning point, because she had to step up. She has to read Brett Coyote. She has to stop lying. She has to stop leaning on all her bad habits. And that's like life. When someone really calls you out on something, and you have to fall on the sword, and you've got to look at yourself and change as best you can, or try again. And that that was a really big beat in this season, and it was sad too, because I was like, are they going to make it through? Like, this was a really big moment for her to have to acknowledge the tables are being turned and he's really struggling, and that forces you to look at your own part of the downfall.
Because did you also find it took her outside of her comfort zone a huge amount? Because even when he does go to therapy and he asks her to come with him, she's kind of doing everything she can to avoid it.
Yeah. She's not taking it seriously. She's avoiding it because she's so uncomfortable, and she does not want to be put in that position, and she feels very vulnerable and humiliated. I think she doesn't want to be someone who's in marriage counselling. I think she looks down on that, and as if they've always had a really good marriage, and it's a positive, that's part of definitely the dynamic that we wanted to set on the show, that it's a happy marriage. And that was really uncomfortable for her. She did not want to acknowledge that at all.
Yeah, because even when she does bring up uncomfortable things, she kind of tries to deflect it. Like, there's a moment where he's like, well, you never went to therapy and you're fine since everything you went through postpartum. And she just very casually goes, well, yeah, I still have some very not good feelings, but I'm fine other than that.
I know. It's like deep-seated, postpartum depression that she's been hiding. Yeah, she's proud. She's proud. She doesn't want to... she doesn't want to admit failures, and that's a funny thing in a character to have that, and very frustrating. I have people like that in my life who won't admit failures and do things like that, but still are very opinionated about other people, and that can be annoying. Yeah.
It's something that everybody does, but maybe not to that degree.
Exactly. Like, I'm always like, wow, okay, how do I get to this place? Because it's not, I would not be comfortable going this far with my opinions on somebody, and she is, and it's a stretch, yeah.
And it kind of speaks to the way in which she's always one step forward, two steps back, I would say, more so than the other way around. Yes. And you feel like the scripts kind of give you that clear delineation of, okay, well, she's managed to overcome this small thing, but then it's going to set her back even further because of this.
Absolutely, you have to. Like, TV is setting up a character, getting the audience to hopefully fall for them, and then seeing how far you can push the character to uncomfortable places, and how far the audience will go with you after they've established this relationship with this character they are rooting for, and you've got to keep that going through episode after episode after episode.
And I imagine it must also create a balance to find when they do argue and they fall out, because there's a scene in this season where they have a huge screaming argument and contemplate not being friends again. And so how do you find the line of how far can we push it if we know that ultimately it is going to mend in some way?
Of course. I mean, I really lean on Nick and Francesca in those sequences of how to really always go as far as we can, and then they need to figure out tonally the whole big tapestry of the show and where these peaks and valleys come of the tension and the conflict, because it's a TV's hard. It's like all those episodes. How do you map that out? And often it changes during the course of filming, even because things are working, things are stronger, things are less strong, and what's going to maintain that rhythm and tone and tension.
Yeah. And especially with the fact that you're a producer on the series as well, you're obviously involved in a lot of those conversations a lot earlier on. Mm. How has that been really beneficial to you in just figuring out some of the nuances of playing someone like Sylvia?
It's fun. It's great to just have more of a seat at the table with producing. So with Platonic, it's very important to do read-throughs, and the read-throughs really set the tone of the whole season, because you hear it out loud and immediately you know if something's working or not with comedy. So and it's a big room full of writers and all the actors and supporting actors and day players and the producers, and you read through the first 5 scripts the first day and the first 5 the second day, and that's the huge big thing where after that we give our thoughts and notes and go, this didn't land, I love that bit, we need to find someone different for that, or whatever it may be. And that, I think that, for this read through for this season, the wedding was at the end, not at the beginning, and they flipped the whole thing because it was like, we need to start stronger, and so it's fascinating the way these things evolve and change, and simply from the 2 or 3 days of reading through the scripts, which you don't do with a film, or I've not done that with a film for years, and this was like a great tradition with comedy that I've done for every big studio comedy I've done. You do these big read-throughs and you hear them out, and they do a whole overhaul after that to see what's landing and what's not.
And especially because the season presents the concept of the 2 of them going into a business partnership together, which is going to be disastrous.
Yes. Hopefully.
But it's great because we've gotten to see intonations of what it looks like when they work together, and when Sylvia's his boss through her events business where he's come and helped her out and it already hasn't gone well. Yeah. And was that something that everybody had the idea for, okay, we're going to create this setup, but we want to kind of show a little teaser?
Yeah, totally. No, they were thinking ahead and going, okay, what's another, how can we set these guys up again to fail in a way? How can we create more chaotic situations? And that is a perfect kind of idea to try to do that, and that little tease when she has him helping, and how that totally backfires and he's kind of clueless, and that so it was a good setup to see how far we can push it next time.
And because of the volatility of her emotions and the way that she's so combustible, how do you kind of constantly think about the pressure cooker situation of what is it that she's been suppressing, what is she holding down? Because sometimes it's something that is just from that conversation or just from that day, but sometimes it's something from 20 years ago.
It's like the small grievances and then the larger ones. And they're always really funny. And that's usually the bigger laughing moments, is when it is these, find it's almost the daily grievances, I think, are the funnier ones in a way, because they're sort of more ridiculous. But it's a tightrope. Comedy is just, you've got to, if it's not working, you have to raise the stakes and you have to make it more important to the person, and again, actively not be funny about it, because for me anyway, I've got to approach it like a drama, and that to me is how it's always worked better like that, even with something more broad like Platonic, where it is where the joke is the precious thing.
I mean, you have such like an incredibly adept, intricate understanding of comedy from everything that you've done throughout your career. And do you almost feel like working on a show like this is very much, taking all of those little pieces from different points in your career and being able to really culminate it into this?
In a way, yeah. I mean, I've had such privilege to work with these extraordinary comedic actors, from when I did Get Him to the Greek to Bridesmaids to Spy, seeing everyone raise the bar to me of what was possible and strive for. And I had the greatest school in that sense of watching these performances, and a lot of these actors come from improv backgrounds, whether it's Upright Citizens Brigade or UCB or Groundlings, and trying to watch and learn as I was doing this was really, I've been so lucky to have that. And I feel Platonic, having started with Nick Stoller and now doing this show with him and with Seth, is this creative conversations that's been going since I was 27, and that's nearly 20 years. So. Yeah.
Because even the movie that you have out right now, If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, is so much more in the dramatic realm, but still adds those comedic elements. Yeah. And, do you feel like you are always kind of consciously thinking about just different ways to be able to kind of weave it into characters and play it differently?
I am. I enjoy, for me, comedy's been the most freeing, creative part of my career, and the most challenging, because you're allowed to do more. And it's, again, I think a performance without comedy is for me impossible. I feel like I have to try to find it somewhere, even if it doesn't work. And often the times the things in Legs didn't work, or stuff in Platonic doesn't work. But that actively always trying to find it and weave it in that tightrope of a performance is intuitive for me. Yeah.
I love it. Well, congratulations on everything with the
Thank you.
season.
Thanks so much.
Hope that we get a season 3.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for coming, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.